You know, for decades, Bill Gates has been seen as this brilliant, benevolent genius. His fortune and his foundation are so huge, they literally rival the influence of entire countries. But behind that image, there's a much more complicated and controversial story. So today, we're going to trace that story, a timeline of power in 2 acts that goes from the boardroom right to the world stage. So what exactly is the Bill Gates problem? Well, it's not just one single thing he did. It's really a much bigger question. It's about what happens when one person, who, by the way, nobody elected, has so much money and so much influence that they can shape public policy, scientific research, even the media, all without any of the democratic accountability the rest of us expect. It's a problem of power. And to really get it, we need to see where all that power came from. To make sense of it all, we're going to break this down into 2 acts, kind of like a play. Act 1, we're calling The Monopolist. That's the story of how Microsoft, with Gates at the helm, became this absolute titan through some really aggressive and, as it turns out, illegal business tactics. Then comes Act 2, The Philanthropist. This is where that same incredible power gets aimed at solving the world's biggest problems. But, as we'll see, the results were complicated. Okay, let's kick things off with Act 1 and the empire that started it all, Microsoft. And listen, this is more than just a story about software. This is about how one of the most powerful monopolies in modern history got built, and the massive legal fight that tried to bring it to heel. So back in 1998, the US government sued Microsoft, and the numbers were just wild. I mean, the company controlled over 95% of the market for PC operating systems. The court found that Microsoft was illegally using this monopoly to just crush any competition. Their big moves were things like product tying, basically forcing PC makers to bundle Internet Explorer with Windows to kill off rivals like Netscape. And the initial ruling was an earthquake. The judge ordered Microsoft to be broken up into 2 separate companies. This court case also gave the world a pretty stunning look at Bill Gates himself. During his deposition, which was all recorded on video, he was incredibly evasive. He kept saying, "I don't recall," to basic questions. He'd argue over the definition of simple words like compete. It was so bad that when they played the tapes in court, the judge actually laughed out loud. It was this incredible moment that just painted a picture of a guy who seemed to think he was totally above it all. Now, here's the part that's absolutely crucial to remember. Yes, Microsoft did win its appeal to stop the company from being broken up. But, and this is a huge but, the appeals court did not say Microsoft was innocent. The main findings stood. The court confirmed that yes, Microsoft had acted like an illegal monopoly and had broken the law to stifle competition. The history books were written, Bill Gates' empire was built by breaking the rules. And that brings us to Act 2. After stepping away from the day-to-day at Microsoft, Gates totally pivoted. He took the same ambition that built a tech monopoly and aimed it at solving huge global problems: health, education, farming. He became the world's most powerful philanthropist. And hey, by the way, if you're enjoying this explainer and finding it useful, please take a second to subscribe. There's a lot more coming your way. So the philosophy behind the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has a name: philanthrocapitalism. The whole idea is to treat charity like a business. You use market logic, you set data-driven targets, you look for tech solutions. But as you might guess, a lot of critics argue that this brings a very corporate top-down mindset to problems that are actually deeply social and political. Let's look at the foundation's efforts in U.S. education, because a pattern starts to emerge pretty quickly. It's a pattern of huge spending followed by, well, failure. First, they poured $650 million into a small schools initiative. It didn't improve student results, so they just abandoned it. Then they put over $200 million into pushing Common Core, which set off a massive political backlash from both sides of the aisle. And then they spent hundreds of millions more on a teacher evaluation system that a major 2018 report found had, you guessed it, failed. And you don't have to take my word for it. This quote from the foundation's own CEO at the time says it all. She basically admitted, "We underestimated how hard this would be, and we didn't really talk to the teachers." And that right there became the recurring criticism. This idea of a billionaire flying in with a tech-style solution without really listening to the people on the ground. Okay, let's switch gears and look at agriculture in Africa. The Gates Foundation has invested a massive amount of money, over $638 million, into a program called AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. The goal was to completely transform farming there. The big promise was to lift people out of poverty and reduce hunger. But the reality? It's pretty shocking. According to United Nations data, In the very countries Agro was targeting, the number of hungry people actually went up during the project by 31%. I mean, the difference between the goal and what actually happened is just staggering. The goal was to double crop yields and double incomes for 30 million farm families. But what really happened? Independent reports found Agra just failed. Critics say it pushed farmers toward expensive chemical fertilizers and corporate-owned seeds, which often left them in debt and gave big agribusiness even more power. Now, when it comes to global health, the foundation's influence is off the charts. It gives so much money that it can essentially shape the priorities of organizations like the World Health Organization. This has led to something people call the Bill chill. It's this effect where scientists and health officials are genuinely afraid to criticize the foundation's strategies because they might lose their funding. And critics argue this pushes a focus on specific tech fixes like a new vaccine while ignoring the less glamorous but crucial work of, building a country's actual public health system. So this all brings us to the final part of our story. This is where all those questions about Gates's professional power start to crash into a really intense public focus on his personal life and conduct. The lines between the monopolist, the philanthropist, and the man, they all start to get really blurry. The first real cracks in his public armor started to show up at his old company. In 2019, news broke that Microsoft's board was investigating Gates for a past sexual relationship with an employee. Before that investigation was even finished, he resigned from the board. Then, more reports came out detailing an alleged pattern of him asking out women who worked for him, not just at Microsoft, but at the Gates Foundation too. This was a completely different ballgame from the antitrust case. This was a corporate ethics probe into his personal behavior. But without a doubt, the most damaging scandal, the one that really shattered his image and was reportedly a major factor in his divorce, was his connection to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. And the timeline here is just critical to understanding this. In 2008, Epstein pleads guilty. It's public record. 3 years later, in 2011, Bill Gates starts meeting with him. And they met multiple times. Then, in 2013, Melinda French Gates meets Epstein, and she is so deeply uncomfortable that she tells her husband she wants nothing to do with him. And yet, the association didn't stop there. The personal toll this took is pretty clear in this incredibly powerful quote from Melinda French Gates. After the divorce, she talked about the Epstein connection, and you can just feel the pain in her words. It makes it clear this wasn't some small disagreement. This went right to the heart of their marriage. For his part, Bill Gates has publicly said it was all a huge mistake. He's explained that his goal was just to discuss philanthropy, and as he says here, he regrets every minute of it. But for a lot of people, that apology just didn't answer the most basic question. Why in the world would you choose to spend time with a known convicted sex offender in the first place? So, after going through the monopolist, the philanthropist, and this intense personal reckoning, what does it all add up to? What is the legacy of all this power? And what's at the core of the Bill Gates problem? Well, this is it. This is the central issue. The Gates Foundation operates on a scale bigger than many countries. Its decisions affect millions and millions of lives. But when one of its big experiments goes wrong, when a project fails, what happens? There's no election to vote them out. There's no public hearing. It's a private entity wielding the power of a nation-state, but with almost none of the checks and balances. And that leaves us with this final, really critical question. The story of Bill Gates is a timeline of power that just keeps expanding, from a corporate monopoly to a global philanthropy that shapes the world. And it forces all of us to grapple with a defining problem of our era. In a world of billionaire titans, when one person's private fortune can influence public life on a global scale, who holds them accountable? Who provides the checks and balances? That is the Bill Gates problem.